Widow's daughter heals Cowboy on Christmas Eve, not knowing he will repay with love. The storm had begun before sunset, an angry flurry of white that swept across the Montana plains as though the very sky had broken open. By nightfall, the wind howled like a living thing, tearing at the shutters of the Hart cabin and piling snow high against the door. Inside, warm light flickered from a single lantern, its glow soft but determined, much like Lydia Hart herself. At 19 she had learned to survive on little more than faith and grit. Her father gone 2 winters now, her mother fading like a candle burned too low, yet Lydia remained hopeful in a way that puzzled even the hardest ranchers in town. Christmas Eve always stirred something inside her, something tender and expectant. So she knelt near the hearth, hands clasped tightly, eyes closed in earnest prayer. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely a breath above the wind's roar, "thank you for bringing us through another year. And if someone is out in this storm, someone lost or hurting, let us be your hands. Let us help them even with our little." Behind her, in a rocking chair worn thin from years of use, widow Margaret Hart listened with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Her health had been slipping steadily, breaths shallow and spaced too far apart. "You pray for others when most would pray only for themselves," she murmured. "Your heart is a generous one, Lydia." Lydia smiled, rising gently. "It's Christmas Eve, Mama. It's the night God gave us His Son. If He could give so much, how can we not give what little we have?" She crossed to the window and wiped away the frost with her sleeve. Outside, the world was a swirling wall of white. No outlines of trees. No moon. Nothing but wind and snow. Just as she turned away, a faint sound drifted beneath the storm, a muffled thud. Lydia paused, listening harder. Then silence. Perhaps a branch had snapped. Perhaps the wind had thrown another weight of snow from the roof. She shook her head, about to return to the fire when, thud, thump, the door shuddered beneath a heavy blow. Lydia gasped. Margaret's knitting slipped from her lap, unraveling across the floor. "What on earth?" Lydia whispered. Her heart pounded so loudly she felt it in her throat. Another pounding came, desperate, weak, as though someone were using the last of their strength just to remain upright. "Someone's out there," Lydia said, her voice trembling. "Then open the door, child," her mother urged softly. "We can't leave a soul outside on a night like this." Lydia's fingers shook as she reached for the latch. "Lord," she murmured, "guide my hands." She pulled the door open, and a blast of freezing wind nearly knocked her backward. A man, tall, broad-shouldered and half-frozen, stumbled inside. Snow clung to his eyelashes and hair, his coat torn, his skin pale with the bluish tint of deep cold. Blood darkened one shoulder of his shirt. He collapsed before Lydia could fully understand what she was seeing. "Sir," she cried, dropping to her knees. "Sir, can you hear me?" The stranger lifted his head just barely. "Didn't think I'd make it," he rasped before his eyes rolled shut. "Lydia, bring him in. Quickly." Margaret coughed, struggling to rise. It took all of Lydia's strength, but she managed to drag the unconscious cowboy fully inside and push the door shut against the storm. Snow melted instantly on the warm floorboards around his body. Margaret reached them, leaning heavily against the table. "Let me see." Lydia brushed the man's wet hair from his forehead. He was young, 25 perhaps, his jaw strong, his skin weather-beaten from the outdoors. But now his face was waxy, drained of life. "Mama," Lydia whispered, her voice cracking, "he's been shot." Margaret nodded gravely. "It looks fresh." For a moment Lydia felt her breath freeze. Gunshots. Bandits. Trouble. Their small cabin was the last place equipped to handle danger. But then, she remembered her prayer moments earlier. God didn't send him here by accident, she said softly, conviction blooming in her chest. He wouldn't have knocked unless the Lord guided him. Margaret's tired eyes softened. "No, child. I don't believe he makes mistakes." Snow pounded the roof like fists from heaven, the wind shrieking around them. But inside their tiny cabin, Lydia pressed her hand to the cowboy's cheek and whispered, "You're safe now. We'll help you. I promise." And though he didn't stir, the room felt suddenly warmer, as if heaven itself had stepped quietly through the door with him. This Christmas Eve would be unlike any the Hart family had ever known. And Lydia, though she didn't yet understand it, had just welcomed into her home the very man God would use to change her life forever. The storm only grew more violent as the night deepened. The wind screamed down the chimney, scattering sparks, and the cabin walls shook as though giants were passing through the forest outside. But Lydia had no room left in her mind for fear, not when a man's life depended on her hands. She knelt beside the stranger, brushing snow from his eyelashes. His skin was ice-cold beneath her fingertips. "Mama, help me lift him," Lydia said urgently. Together, Margaret leaning heavily on the table for balance, they eased the cowboy onto the narrow cot near the fire. Lydia tugged off his soaked coat, then his shirt, jaw tightening at the sight of the wound. The bullet had only grazed his shoulder, but the bleeding had continued in the storm long enough to weaken him terribly. His skin was pale, trembling with shock, and his lips had begun to take on a dangerous blue tint. "Mama," Lydia breathed, "if we'd opened the door a minute later, he would have frozen." Margaret nodded weakly, lowering herself onto a stool and holding her ribs as she caught her breath. "God's timing is never late." Those words steadied Lydia more than she could express. She heated water over the fire and gathered every herb and scrap of cloth she owned. Mint for fever, plantain for cleansing, and the last of her dried camphor leaves, saved for emergencies and prayed over many times. Her hands trembled at first, but she forced herself to remember the doctor who once passed through town, the way he'd taught her simple treatments for simple wounds before winter drove him to a bigger settlement. "You learned well," she whispered to herself, though uncertainty gnawed at her. But this man wasn't just a patient. He was someone's son. Someone's brother, perhaps. Someone with a story she knew nothing about. The stranger groaned softly as she cleaned the wound. His eyelashes fluttered. "You're all right," Lydia murmured, voice soft and steady despite her racing heart. "You're safe inside. Just hold on." He blinked groggily, meeting her eyes for the first time. And something in that moment, something small, something faint, shifted in her chest. Maybe it was the way his gaze held hers despite the pain. Maybe it was seeing raw fear and exhaustion in a man who otherwise carried the ruggedness of the frontier on his skin. Or maybe it was simply because, for the first time since her father died, she felt needed. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The cowboy swallowed, voice thin. "Elias Carter." "Well, Elias Carter," she replied, concentrating as she pressed a clean cloth to the wound. "You're going to be all right. You're among folks who won't leave you out in the cold." He exhaled shakily. "Didn't expect an angel to be the one patching me up." Heat rushed to her cheeks. Hardly an angel. Just someone doing what anyone ought to do. Elias tried to shift but winced sharply. Lydia steadied him with a hand on his good shoulder. "Don't move. You'll reopen it." He fell silent and allowed her to finish bandaging him. His breath slowly evened out. A touch of color returned to his cheeks. Margaret watched from the rocking chair, her knitting forgotten on her lap. "You have a gentle way with the hurting, Lydia," she murmured. Lydia shrugged, embarrassed. "I'm only trying to help." Her mother's gaze was warm but knowing. "Help comes from the heart, child. And yours is still whole, even after all it has endured." Lydia swallowed down a sudden sting of tears. She didn't want Elias to hear that. She didn't want anyone to know how often she felt she was just barely holding the cabin, and herself, together. When the wound was cleansed and wrapped, Lydia fetched the worn family Bible from the shelf. She sat beside the cot, opening it to a passage her father read every Christmas Eve. Her voice was hushed but unwavering as she read. "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds." Psalm 147 verse 3. Elias, eyes half closed, watched her face as she read. The pain seemed to soften around his features. The frostbite on his fingers eased with the warmth of the fire, and he slowly sank into a deeper, safer sleep. Lydia closed the Bible and remained seated at his side, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, almost without realizing she'd done it. "He'll live," she whispered to Margaret. "By God's grace, he'll live." The storm raged outside, battering the world with its fury. But inside the little cabin, something gentle settled into place. A fragile peace. A quiet hope. And the first stitch of a bond God himself had begun weaving long before that knock on the door. And as Lydia dozed beside the sleeping cowboy, she didn't know that the man she'd just saved would one day offer her a kind of love she had never dared to pray for. Morning crept into the cabin slowly, as though unsure it had permission to intrude after such a stormy night. Sunlight filtered through the frost-covered window, turning the room into a hazy gold. The storm had passed, leaving the world blanketed in a deep, glistening silence. Lydia stirred first. She had fallen asleep sitting upright beside Elias, her head resting against the wall, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She blinked, rubbed her eyes and looked toward the cot. Elias was awake. Not entirely alert, but awake enough to watch her with a mixture of gratitude and confusion, as though trying to piece together how he had arrived in this warm, humble home. He swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. Didn't mean to give you a fright. Lydia sat up straighter. You didn't frighten me. Just gave me an urgent reason to keep the fire burning, she said with a small smile. Elias returned it faintly. It suited him, softening the rugged lines of his face. You saved my life, he murmured. I owe you more than I can say. You owe me nothing, she replied gently, rising to check his bandage. God sent you here. We just opened the door. His eyes softened, tracing the sincerity in her expression. Margaret, stirring in her rocker, cleared her throat. Your shoulder looks better today, Mr. Carter. Please, call me Elias, he said. Well, Elias, Margaret continued, you're safe here. Rest as long as needed. He nodded gratefully before turning back to Lydia. How bad is it? He asked, glancing at his shoulder. It was deep, she admitted, but the bullet didn't lodge. The bleeding slowed. You'll still be sore for a while, though. He breathed out a relieved sigh. Bless the Lord. Lydia paused. She hadn't expected those words from him. Simple, reverent, spoken like a man remembering something long forgotten. You believe? She asked softly. Elias hesitated. His gaze drifted toward the small wooden cross above the hearth, old, worn, carved by Lydia's father years before. I used to, he said finally. Before life went the way it did. Lydia felt something inside her tighten, a quiet compassion for wounds deeper than the one she'd bandaged. Sometimes, she said, choosing her words carefully, faith feels like a rope we grab when the river pulls hard. Sometimes we hold on. Sometimes, the current drags us away. But God holds the other end even when we can't. Elias blinked at her, taken aback by the gentle wisdom tumbling from someone so young. He looked away, jaw tightening faintly. I lost my folks last year. Accident out on the trail. His voice cracked almost imperceptibly. Haven't been able to pray since. Lydia's heart ached. She knew grief, knew how it left you hollow and trembling, unsure if God still heard a word you said. I'm sorry, she whispered. Losing people, it changes you. It changed everything, Elias murmured. They fell silent for a moment. The fire crackled softly. Margaret, ever perceptive, spoke from her chair with a quiet firmness. Son, God knows you're hurt. And he ain't angry about the silence. He's patient. Elias lifted his head, meeting her tired but wise gaze. You really think he hasn't given up on me? Margaret's smile was thin but resolute. He brought you through a storm to our doorstep on Christmas Eve. That doesn't look like giving up to me. A long breath escaped Elias's lips, almost like relief. Lydia placed a new bowl of warm porridge into his hands. Eat slowly, she said. You've been through much. He obeyed. Even in simple movements, she saw how exhausted he truly was. But color began returning to his face with each spoonful. The more he ate, the more his story unfolded, haltingly as if each memory cost him something. He had been traveling home to his ranch after delivering winter wages to ranch hands in a nearby town. Along the way, 3 men hiding in the pines had ambushed him, assuming he carried the money. He managed to escape with only the bullet graze, but the storm had swallowed him before he could make it far. I didn't think I'd last the night, he confessed, staring into the steam curling from his bowl. Lydia felt her chest tighten again. She imagined him stumbling through the blizzard, half blind with pain, half frozen, praying, or perhaps not praying, just hoping for a miracle. You made it here, she said softly. That was no accident. He met her eyes. And for the first time he didn't look away. A warmth, quiet and unfamiliar, stirred between them like the first flutter of a bird's wing. Elias set the bowl aside, eyes heavy with exhaustion. I reckon I owe the Lord, and you both, more than I can say. Lydia reached for a blanket and gently tucked it around him. You owe us nothing, she whispered. Just heal. His gaze lingered on her kindness, her steadiness, her faith that glowed quieter but brighter than the fire beside them. And as he drifted to sleep again, Lydia watched his breathing settle, her heart fluttering with something she hadn't expected. Something careful. Something tender. Something that felt like the very beginning of God stitching 2 broken pieces together. She didn't understand it yet. But heaven had already begun its work. The days after Christmas Eve passed in a gentle rhythm, as soft and steady as the winter sun that now glowed through the frosted windows. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a world sparkling like fresh grace poured over the land. Inside the cabin, warmth gathered again, both from the crackling fire and from the quiet presence of the man who now occupied their home. Elias Carter had regained his strength slowly but surely. Though he still winced when he lifted his left arm, the worst of the pain had eased. Lydia's bandaging and care had done more for him than any doctor could have. She didn't just heal his wound. She tended to his spirit with her gentleness, her steady presence, and the soft glow of faith in her eyes. He felt it every time she entered the room. And that alone frightened him more than any bandit or bullet. Margaret's watching eyes. Widow Margaret saw it all long before either of them dared to acknowledge it. She watched the way Lydia's eyes lingered on Elias when he slept. She noticed how Elias sat a little straighter when Lydia brought him tea. She observed the faint, unspoken pull between them, the way light draws toward light. One evening, while Lydia prepared supper, Elias stepped outside to breathe the crisp winter air. Snow glimmered under the moon, untouched except for his footprints. He inhaled deeply, appreciating the silence. But his thoughts were anything but silent. Lydia's kindness had unsettled something deep inside him, something he thought he'd buried with his parents. And now that it had awakened, he didn't know how to put it back to sleep. Margaret waited for him when he returned. "Sit with me, Elias," she said softly, patting the chair beside her. He obeyed. Even in her frailty, she carried an authority that felt almost motherly. He steadied her thin blanket on her knees. She gave a grateful smile. "You're healing well," she said. "Thanks to your daughter," he murmured. "She's got a gift." Margaret studied him quietly. "A gift from the Lord indeed. But not just for herbs and bandages. She has a gift for hearts." A flush crept up Elias's neck. He looked away quickly. Margaret chuckled breathlessly. "Oh child, you don't have to hide it. I was young once." Elias rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma'am, I didn't. I wasn't trying to." "I know," she interrupted softly. "But God does things in His own time. And He doesn't bring souls together by accident." She paused, her breathing thin. Elias felt a prickle of worry. "Mrs. Hart, is it your lungs again? Should I fetch Lydia?" "No," she whispered, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "There is something I need to say. And it must be said to you alone." Elias sat very still. "I see a wound in you," Margaret said. "Not the one on your shoulder. A deeper one. The kind that settles behind the eyes when grief has taken more than it should." Elias swallowed hard. "I didn't think it showed." "Oh, it shows," she replied gently. "But Lydia's kindness has stirred something in you, hasn't it?" He looked down at his hands, rough, weathered, cracked from years of work and recent cold. "I don't know what it's stirring," he admitted quietly. "I've been alone a long time. Tried to get used to it." Margaret smiled tenderly. "Loneliness is something a soul never truly gets used to. It only learns how to hide it." He huffed a breath that was half laugh, half despair. "You sound like a preacher." "No," she whispered. "Just a woman who's lived long enough to see God mend hearts that were sure they'd stay broken." Her gaze grew thoughtful, almost sad. "Lydia has carried more than a daughter her age should. She's held this home together with womanly hands and girlhood tears. She learned to smile again, but not because life became easier, only because she trusted God more fiercely." Elias's throat tightened. "She deserves more than this hard life." "Perhaps," Margaret said. "Or perhaps God will send someone who sees her worth for what it truly is." He met her eyes then. And something passed between them. A silent understanding. A truth neither had spoken aloud. A possibility neither dared claim. Margaret reached for his hand once more. "Elias, don't run from what God places before you. If He leads your heart, follow." His voice trembled. "But I'm not sure I'm the man she deserves." "Good," Margaret said, smiling through tired eyes. "Only proud men think they deserve love. The humble ask God to help them grow into it." Elias bowed his head. "How can you trust me with her? You barely know me." Margaret closed her eyes, resting her head back against the chair. "I know what eyes look like when they hold kindness," she murmured. "And yours do. I know what hearts look like when they long for something good. And yours does." He stared at her, utterly humbled. Then her voice softened to a whisper. "You may have come here wounded, but God brought you here for more than healing." Lydia appeared in the doorway then, holding a bowl of warm stew. "Elias? Supper is ready." He turned toward her, and the smile she gave him made something inside his chest shift, settle, bloom. A warmth he hadn't felt in a very, very long time. That night, as Lydia served him supper and laughed when he spilled a bit of tea on his blanket, Elias realized something. This cabin wasn't just a place of healing. It was becoming a place of home. And he didn't know how to stop it. Something tender had begun. Something unplanned. Something holy. And while Lydia felt it only in the quiet fluttering of her heart, Elias felt it like a man waking from a long dark sleep. God was stirring. And neither of them knew what would come next. Snow fell heavier that Christmas Eve night, blanketing the cabin roof in a quiet hush. Inside, the fire crackled softly, casting warm, golden light across the room. Clara kept checking the stew, though it had finished cooking long ago, and her mother, Widow Hannah, noticed. "You've stirred that pot so many times you'll wear it thin," her mother teased gently, wiping flour from her hands as she shaped the last round of bread. Clara flushed. "I'm just making sure it doesn't burn." But they both knew the truth. Clara's eyes kept flicking to the small bedroom where the stranger, Noah, rested. It had been 3 days since Clara first found him bleeding in the snow. His fever had broken that morning. His color was returning. And yet, worry still tugged at her heart like a persistent child. Widow Hannah walked to her side and placed a warm, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You care," she said softly. "That's not a burden, it's a blessing." Clara opened her mouth to protest, but her mother had already turned toward the bedroom. "Go on, child," she whispered. "He'll rest easier if he sees you." Clara swallowed, nodded, and stepped toward the door. Inside the room, Noah's eyes were half open, their blue dulled by exhaustion but still gentle. When he saw Clara, the faintest smile touched his lips, tired but grateful. "You came," he murmured. "I never left," she said, instantly embarrassed by how the words came out. But Noah didn't tease. Instead, he eased himself up against the pillow, wincing but stubborn. "I owe you my life." Clara shook her head quickly. "You owe God, not me. I just did what anyone would." Noah chuckled dryly. "Not anyone would climb into a blizzard for a stranger." Clara felt warmth rise into her cheeks. "It felt like I was supposed to. Like the Lord nudged me." Noah grew quiet at that. He looked down at his hands. "I've been a long way from God," he admitted, voice low. "Too long." Clara sat gently on the edge of the bed. "But he's not far from you. He never is." Noah blinked hard, and Clara realized his eyes weren't dulled by pain. He was fighting tears. "My brother died last winter," he whispered. "I carried anger with me since then. Rode until I didn't care where I ended up. I thought God had forgotten me." Her heart broke, slowly and quietly. "No," she said softly. "He brought you here, didn't he?" Noah let out a shaking breath, the kind that sounded like a man learning how to hope again. A candlelit prayer. Widow Hannah entered with a mug of warm broth. She held it out, then paused at the sight of Noah's bowed head and Clara's hand resting gently on the blanket near his. "You two all right?" she asked. Noah nodded, wiping discreetly at his eyes. "Better than I deserve, ma'am." She set the mug on the table and touched his shoulder with motherly firmness. "The Lord doesn't give out blessings based on who deserves what," she said. "He gives them because he loves us. You're safe here, Noah." Noah looked at both of them, really looked, with a softness Clara hadn't seen before. "Could we pray?" he asked, voice thick. "I think it's time I talked to God again." Widow Hannah smiled, sitting on one side of him as Clara took the other. The room glowed with the warmth of the fire and the gentle flicker of the candle on the nightstand. Hannah began to pray, slow and tender. Noah gripped the blanket tightly, like a man clinging to a lifeline. Clara bowed her head but opened her eyes for a moment, just to see Noah's expression as he whispered, broken and sincere, "Lord, thank you for not giving up on me." Clara felt her breath catch. Something holy was in that room. Something peaceful. Something new. A quiet promise. After the prayer, Noah turned to Clara and spoke in a voice steady and warm. "Clara, I don't know how I'll repay you or your ma for all this. But once I'm on my feet, I'll make things right. I'll work, I'll help, I'll—" Clara shook her head, smiling gently. "We didn't save you for repayment." Noah met her gaze, long, searching, sincere. "Still," he murmured, "I'll repay you somehow. One way or another." His eyes softened, lingering on her in a way that sent warmth fluttering through her chest. Clara looked away, suddenly shy. But deep down, where unspoken hopes quietly bloomed, she wondered if the repayment he spoke of wasn't work, or chores, or coin, but something far sweeter, and much closer to love. The morning of Christmas dawned pale and quiet, the world outside the cabin wrapped in a silver hush. Frost clung to the window panes in delicate patterns, God's artwork, Clara thought as she lit the small oil lamp on the table. Her breath fogged faintly in the cool air, but the cabin was warm with the scent of baking bread and pinewood smoke. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb Noah, though she knew he was awake. She'd learned his rhythms these last few days, How he winced when he shifted, how he held his breath when pain sliced through his ribs, how he relaxed only when she spoke gently. It felt strange how easily he'd become part of their days. As she ladled warm oatmeal into wooden bowls, she heard the soft creak of the bedroom door. "Noah, you shouldn't be up," she said, already hurrying to him. He leaned heavily on the doorframe, one arm pressing his healing wound. But his smile, small and stubborn, was brighter than the morning light. "It's Christmas," he said. "If the Lord woke me to another dawn, the least I can do is stand for it." Clara shook her head, but her heart warmed. She slipped a hand beneath his arm to steady him. He tensed, not from pain but from the sudden closeness. Clara felt it too, a flicker of warmth rising between them like a hidden flame. Widow Hannah turned from the stove, eyes widening. "Boy, you're gonna fall straight through the floor at this rate. Sit down before you make me faint." Noah laughed quietly. "Yes, ma'am." A Christmas breakfast of grace. They gathered at the small wooden table, Noah moving slowly but determined. Clara guided him into his chair, noting the way his hand lingered near hers before settling in his lap. Hannah bowed her head to pray. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for this home, and for miracles that walk through our doors when we least expect it." Noah's eyes opened at that, his gaze drifting to Clara. She pretended not to notice, though her cheeks warmed. They ate slowly, quietly, the way people do when sharing more than a meal. Hope, gratitude, something new blooming in the space between breaths. Halfway through breakfast, Noah paused, setting down his spoon. I have something I want to say." Clara and her mother both looked up. Noah swallowed hard. His voice was rough in that way men get when speaking from the heart. "I came here broken," he began. "Not just in body but in spirit. I didn't think anyone cared if I lived or died. But you." His eyes drifted again to Clara. "You nursed me back. You prayed over me. You treated me like I mattered when I didn't feel like I did." Clara felt her throat tighten. Widow Hannah folded her hands gently. "I never got a chance to know what family felt like," Noah continued. "My brother was the only kin I had, and when he died, I figured love died with him." His voice cracked. Not loudly, softly enough that it broke Clara's heart. "But this place, this home." He gestured around with a trembling breath. "You showed me I was wrong." Clara reached across the table without thinking and placed her hand over his. Noah froze, then slowly, gratefully closed his fingers around hers. He held on as if her touch anchored him. The gift of the heart. After breakfast, Clara helped him back toward the bedroom. But when they reached the doorway, Noah stopped her. "Clara," he said quietly, "there's something I want to give you." She blinked. "Give me?" He nodded and reached for the small leather pouch he had arrived with. Pain tugged at his ribs, but he grit his teeth through it. From the pouch, he drew out something small wrapped in a scrap of cloth. "It isn't much," he murmured, "but it's all I have." He opened the cloth to reveal a silver pendant. Simple, worn, but delicately engraved with a small cross at its center. "It was my mother's," he said. "The last thing she gave me before she passed. I carried it through storms, across states, through every dark place I wandered, because I thought it was the only piece of love I had left." Clara stared at the pendant, speechless. "But, why give it to me?" she whispered. Noah's eyes softened with an honesty that stole her breath. "Because I found something better than hope in this cabin," he said. "I found faith again. And I found you." Her hand trembled as he placed the pendant into her palm. "Noah," she breathed. He looked at her, really looked. The kind of look a man gives when his heart has finally found a place to belong. "I don't have the strength to give you anything else right now," he said softly. "But someday when God allows, I hope I can give you more." Clara felt tears gather, but they were not sad tears. They were the kind that fall when a prayer begins to take form. "Noah," she whispered, voice shaking, "this is the best Christmas gift I've ever received." His breath caught, and something peaceful settled in his eyes, like a storm finally ending. A moment set apart. As she clasped the pendant around her neck, Noah whispered, "Merry Christmas, Clara." She smiled, heartful. "Merry Christmas, Noah." And though snow drifted silently outside and the world remained cold as winter, inside that cabin God was weaving a story of restoration, of healing, of hearts drawn together by divine timing. A story neither of them yet realized was only just beginning. The cabin was quieter than usual that evening. Snow still fell steadily outside, but the storm had softened into a gentle drift that whispered against the windows. Clara had lit the lanterns early, their warm glow filling the room with a peaceful golden hue. Noah stood near the window, leaning against the frame. He still moved slowly, but strength had begun returning to him, bit by bit, day by day. His silhouette looked almost at home there, as if the Lord himself had carved out a place for him beside that window. Clara watched him from the table where she was folding blankets. She didn't mean to stare, but something in his posture, calm, yet brimming with unspoken words, held her in a quiet grip. Widow Hannah glanced between them knowingly. "Clara," she said gently, "why don't you take Noah for a short walk outside? The snow's light now. I think you both have a few things to say." Clara's heart skipped. Noah turned at the same moment, his eyes meeting hers with that familiar warmth that made her breath catch. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. Clara fetched Noah's coat and he slipped it on with her help, his fingers brushing hers. Electricity tingled through her hand and Noah paused, not pulling away, not explaining, but simply holding the moment between them like something sacred. The walk beneath heaven's quiet. Outside the world sparkled. The moon peered through thin clouds, lighting the snow in soft silver. Their boots sank with each step, leaving two sets of footprints side by side. Clara walked slowly, matching Noah's careful pace. He breathed in the cold air, savoring it as if it tasted different now, cleaner, purer. "Clara," he said after a moment, his voice steady but tender, "I've been waiting for the right time to talk to you." She swallowed. "I figured." He chuckled. "You always did see right through me." They stopped near the old cedar tree where Clara used to play as a child. Its branches stretched overhead like sheltering arms. Noah turned to face her fully. "Before I came here, I didn't think my life had any direction. I was angry, lost, and more alone than I ever realized." He exhaled softly, watching his breath form a cloud in the cold. "I thought God had turned his back on me. But the truth was, I turned mine on him." Clara listened quietly, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "Then," Noah continued, looking at her with a softness she could feel down to her soul, "God led me to you." Her breath hitched. Snowflakes drifted between them, melting on Noah's lashes. "You didn't just save my life, Clara," he said. "You saved my heart. You helped me find God again, and myself." Clara's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Noah, I only did what anyone would." "No," he interrupted gently. "Not anyone. You." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Clara's heart leaped, but Noah shook his head with a shy smile. "Not a ring," he said. "Not yet. I'm not ready to make a vow to you until I can stand tall and provide like a man should." He paused. "But I am ready to make a promise." Slowly he placed the small bundle in her hand. Clara unfolded the cloth to find a carved wooden bird, simple but delicately shaped, its wings slightly open as if ready to take flight. She traced its edges in awe. "I carved it during the times you thought I was sleeping," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "It's not perfect, but it's meant to show something." "What does it mean?" she whispered. Noah stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his breath warm against the cold air. "It means I'm learning to fly again," he said softly. "Because of you. Because of faith. Because God put you in my path." Clara felt tears slipping down her cheeks, warm against the winter air. "Noah." He reached up, brushing one of her tears with his thumb. His touch was gentle, reverent, almost trembling. "I want to repay you," he said quietly. "But not with money or chores or a debt." He took her hands in his, strong and steady despite the cold. "I want to repay you with a life." His voice deepened with emotion. "A life spent proving that God can turn brokenness into a home, if you'll let me share it with you. Someday, not today, not rushed, but someday. Clara, I want to marry you." Her breath caught completely. Noah smiled, and it wasn't a wounded smile or a hopeful one, it was the smile of a man finally at peace. "I'm not asking you now," he said gently. "Not while I'm still healing. Not while I have nothing to offer but a heart God is still rebuilding. But Claire, I want you to know what direction I'm walking toward." She squeezed his hands, emotion thick in her throat. "Noah," she whispered, voice shaking like a candle flame, "you've already given me something worth more than any ring." "What's that?" he asked, eyes tender. "Hope," she breathed. He let out a soft, breathless laugh, the sound of someone who'd carried pain for too long and finally set it down. A promise sealed by heaven's quiet. They stood under the cedar tree as snow floated around them, the world hushed in holy stillness. When Noah stepped closer, Clara didn't step back. He leaned his forehead gently against hers. No kiss, nothing rushed, just a touch full of promise and reverence. "Someday," he whispered again. "Yes," Clara breathed. Someday, when they returned to the cabin, Widow Hannah saw the glow on their faces and smiled knowingly. And from that night forward, every prayer Noah prayed, every step he took toward healing, was whispered with Clara's name tucked gently inside it. Because God had not only rescued him, he had led him to love. A love born in winter, warmed by faith, and promised beneath falling snow. And Noah intended to repay Clara with the greatest gift he had, his future.